Okay, well, I've got just a couple minutes after 2:30 p.m. here, so I think be a good time to go ahead and get started with our webinar. My name is Zach Stewart. I'm with the Surface Waters Program up here in Douglas County in the northwesternmost corner of the state. Super happy to be here today with my co-project leader Emily to talk to y'all about Big McGraw Lake and yellow flag iris down there. Um, Emily, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, Emily Moore here. I'm the county conservationist with the Burnett County Land and Water Division. I'm the county just south of Zach. Um, we for I guess just to give a little context of why we're here. Um, the my department found yellow iris on Big McGraw during a point intercept survey a couple years ago. And the lake has a like a community group, but it doesn't have a like a official lake association. And we noticed that the yellow iris was kind of starting to take off. So I reached out to Zach just because the lake borders Douglas and Burnett County, and I'm like, this would be a perfect opportunity for our counties to connect and do a project together. And he agreed. So we applied for a rapid response grant to control the yellow iris. So this presentation is all about our efforts for year one of monitoring and controlling the yellow iris. And I just wanted to mention that this webinar is being recorded just because we had some folks that couldn't join. So just to let you know, but there will be questions at the end. So feel free to hold those until we finish. But all right, so we'll start. See if I can go towards okay, here we go.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's start off with a little outline of what Emily and I want to talk about today. I'll give a brief introduction to Big McGraw Lake and the plant community there. I want to touch on the identification characteristics of invasive yellow flag iris versus native blue flag iris. I'll talk about the methodology that we used to conduct high resolution mapping of both species during this first year of our project. Um, and then we'll get into control methods that we've chosen to use on Big McGraw Lake. We'll touch on the landowner engagement, the importance of the community support for this project, some of the partnerships that are helping make this work possible, and then importantly, our plan going forward for 2025 and 2026. Then we'll wrap up with a quick note about prevention of aquatic invasive species and how you can get involved with this project as a landowner, a community member,
Yell at
or
me
a
for being in the
professional
way. My
going
dishes.
forward. Colleen will just have you mute that, please. Thank you very much. Um, awesome. And hey, I just want to note as well that our goal for the day is hopefully to provide some information for the local community and landowners. So Emily and I are going to keep this relatively short. And at the end, we'll stick around. We've got plenty of time for questions and discussion. So please feel free to pop questions into the chat at any time. Or if you want to hold your questions to the end, we'll unmute and we'll have a bit of an open discussion then. Okay, so here's Big McGraw Lake. Big McGraw is a roughly 140-acre seepage lake. As Emily mentioned, it's located straddling the county line between Douglas County in the north and Burnett County in the south. And if you look at this map, you'll see from the green symbols there that there are a lot of wetlands surrounding this lake. And that's definitely something that caught our eye as we were planning this project. There's a lot of high quality wetland habitat, and we think that that makes Big McGraw Lake special, and it makes it a good opportunity for early detection and rapid response to help protect this ecosystem. If you look at that photo I took from my kayak on the left-hand side, you can see kind of a typical Big McGraw Lake shoreline. There's relatively minimal development. There is a beautiful, diverse patchwork of native plant species, and you can see that there's good, diverse structure. to that native plant community. So you've got like alders and shrubs in the background. You've got your emergent native vegetation sticking up out of the water. And then in the foreground, you've got your floating leaf aquatic plants and your submerged aquatic plants underneath. And that kind of diversity in structure and diversity of species is fantastic for habitat, for mammals, for fish, for birds, and native insects. So, Big McGraw Lake is a pretty neat place, and it's characterized by some really, really nice habitat, including blue irises, which are a native species of iris. You can't hardly detect in this photo, but they're hiding back there in the net in many places around the lake. You want to pop to the next one, please, Emily?
Mhm.
Thank you much. So there's a huge value in this native plant diversity. Not only is it good for water quality and good for habitat, but it is potentially one of our best defenses against incoming aquatic invasive species. These biodiverse native communities occupy space and they provide a really good service in helping us keep invasives like yellow flag iris out. Next. So here is what we're here to talk about today. This is the yellow flag iris. The Latin name is Iris pseudacarus. It is an aquatic invasive species. That means it's not native to our area and it does cause some type of ecological or economic harm when it takes over. In Wisconsin, it's NR40 regulated. So that's basically the second most strict category of invasive species. And I want to just briefly review with everyone how to identify it and how to tell the difference from our really wonderful native blue irises. So, first and foremost, yellow flag iris has a yellow flower. That is definitely the most useful ID characteristic. They flower typically around June, and that's the easiest way to tell the difference. These yellow flag irises are characterized by a thick sword-like leaf. I've seen them as long as 4 or 5 feet in length, these big sword-like leaves, and they have a thick midvein to that leaf. Lastly, the yellow flag iris, after it gets done flowering, it generates a seed pod that's pretty meaty. It's like about the size of a large thumb. Um, and I've got a large thumb right here for scale. So they make these pretty big seed pods. And when you crack one of those seed pods open, they're filled with 3 rows of seeds inside. And I'll show you a photo of that in a second. Next, please. So let's contrast those 3 ID characteristics to the native blue flag iris. Blue flag iris is beneficial. It provides great habitat for our insects and our wildlife. Um, and the easiest way to tell the difference is, again, that flower color. So here's a photo. This is from Big McGraw Lake last June. And they produce bluish to purplish flowers. I would really describe them as more purple, but there is some variability. Um, they also have a long sword-like leaf with a midvein. Okay. Now, those leaves on a native blue flag iris tend to be a little smaller, a little less robust, and the midvein is less thick. But I'm going to tell you, it's pretty hard to identify blue flag versus yellow flag iris unless you're like holding a known leaf in your left hand and a known leaf of the other species in your right hand, and you can really compare those 2 leaves. So for folks making ID in the field, I would suggest the best way to do it is just wait for that flower, take careful notes, take a photograph, and then you'll know going forward if you've got yellow or blue at that location. Because the leaves, they can be kind of tricky. Now, the seed pod is a decent way, if you miss the flowers and you get there too late, that's a decent way to make the ID as well. So the blue flag iris seed pods are a little smaller on average. And when you crack them open, they also have 3 compartments, but each compartment has a double row of seeds. So there's actually a total of 6 little rows of seeds instead of 3. And if we could hop to the next slide, I will show you what that looks like. So this is a native blue flag iris seed pod. And it just so happens the reason my colleague Dara took this photo is because there's a weevil that has bored these little holes through the seeds. And this is the only good photo I have of a blue iris seed pod. So ignore those holes from the weevil and just look at how that seed pod has three compartments. And each of those three compartments has a double row of seeds in it. So you got a total of six. If you crack it open and you see those three compartments, and each compartment is just filled with a full row of round seeds for a total of three, then that tells you it's an invasive yellow flag iris. And on the next slide here, we will look at yellow flag iris seed pods. So this is what they look like before they're cracked open. This is from the St. Louis River estuary up here in Douglas County. And you can see those are big thumb-sized seed pods. They're pretty robust. And it's not uncommon to see like 40 of those on a large plant. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's now we know, I guess, a little bit about Big McGraw and why we are concerned about yellow flag irises being there, why we feel that it's a good place for early detection, rapid response, and we know how to make our ID. So let's talk a little bit about the reproduction and the spread of yellow flag iris. Unfortunately, it's a pretty aggressive spreader, and this is why it's NR40 restricted and why we're concerned about it. So it spreads in two primary methods. First is the rhizomes. Photo on the left, I'm holding a pretty big, satisfying yellow flag iris rhizome. That's from the Bois Brule River out in eastern Douglas County. And what these plants do is they sprout their leaves early. They start gathering sunlight, they photosynthesize, and they pump sugars into these rhizomes all year long. And they can grow pretty extensive networks of these fleshy rhizomes. They're kind of like a potato, like they want to crack easily in your hand, and they're actually bright pink inside, which is kind of interesting. And these rhizomes will just spread through the muck or the soil or sand or rocky substrate. They're quite cosmopolitan with respect to their preference for different substrates. And those rhizomes will just spread and colonize a wider and wider ring. And then next spring, they'll release their energy and they'll sprout new leaves there. So that rhizome spread tends to expand the footprint of the yellow flag iris over time and just crowd out the surrounding native species gradually. The second way they spread is through producing seeds. They can produce hundreds and hundreds of seeds per plant every year. Later in the fall, September, October, even into November this year, those seed pods will start to dry out and burst open, and they release up to about 200 or so seeds per pod. And those seeds are like a little smaller than a dime. They're quite buoyant. They're coated in a waxy substance and they float. So the photo on the right here is my finger touching the surface of the water, and you can see those four brown circles. Yeah, thank you, Emily. Her cursor is pointing out those four brown circles, and those are yellow flag iris seed pods floating, or seeds floating in the Brule River. So those seeds are quite robust, and unfortunately, they'll spread across the lake with wind or with current. They'll land, and if they land in a favorable substrate, they start a new plant there. Some studies have shown that these seeds have a viability of up to at least 7 years. I assume that there's some attrition through that time, that not every seed is going to make it 7 years, but they can produce a little bit of a seed bank that can be a problem to deal with. Let's pop to the next slide, please. Oh, yeah. So that's what the inside of a yellow flag iris rhizome looks like. They're like fibrous and they're quite a bright pink. So they're really kind of unique. They almost look like you want to take a bite out of them, but do not do that because yellow flag iris is known to be at least mildly toxic, and can definitely cause problems for people or pets or children that might ingest it. It's not like the world's deadliest poison, but resist the urge to bite into one of those rhizomes. Next slide, please. So let's get into the actual project that Emily and I are working on. So the first step was to conduct this high resolution mapping. We wanted to know exactly how much yellow flag iris we're dealing with and how much blue flag iris we are lucky enough to have. Um, so I went out by boat in June and marked basically every individual yellow and blue iris on the lake with a GPS point. And we discussed a way to quantify the size of them. So we created a 1 to 5 numerical scale where a one is basically just a single leaf or the smallest plant that you can identify, and a five is a plant that's 1 square meter in aerial extent or larger. Okay, so we rated these things 1 to 5 for every single point. And the reason it's important, I think, to invest so much effort into this is because it helps us form a plan of where we're going to go and how we're going to control them, but also it gives us a baseline from which to evaluate our results. Um, so looking at the map on the left, each one of those yellow points represents the 117 invasive yellow irises that existed on Big McGraw. And then the 81 blue points represent the native blue irises. So our goal, of course, is to control as many of those yellow irises as possible and hopefully see a reduction in the average amount over the course of this project and in post-project monitoring. Um, with that, I think I'll pass it over to Emily to talk a
Mhm.
little bit more about our control methods.
Yeah, so we did our first control event this year. I think it was begin or end of May, early June. Before we even went out, I sent out permission slips to the landowners around the lake that we knew had yellow iris just to get permission because part of the iris was either on their shoreline or just in the immediate water, shallow water there. We wanted to make sure that they were aware of what we were going to do. We received some permission back, but not from everybody. Um, we did know that we had a lot of yellow iris that we needed to control, so the next step was to recruit some volunteers to help us. So we got 12 volunteers to come out and help from a couple from the National Park Service and a few from the Wild Rivers Conservancy and one volunteer from the Burnett County Lakes and Rivers Association, and then Zach, myself, and my two interns were all out going around the lake. So we basically just separated out into three groups. I took my interns out on the boat and we went around and did all of the yellow iris removal on the island and then in the extensive wetland areas up in the north portion of Douglas County. We had one group go on the west side of Big McGraw, and then one group went down on the east side of Big McGraw. And whichever group finished first just kind of joined in with another group to help with the control. Before we got started, we knew that we had some varying skill sets with identifying the yellow iris. So we did like a little training just before we went out. But we made sure that we had like a leader in the groups that knew how to identify it just to make sure because we knew that we had a lot of blue iris in proximity to the yellow iris. So these are just our volunteers. We borrowed the St. Croix Red Cedar CWMA trailer that had a lot of equipment for the day too, just because we knew we were going to need a lot of shovels and hand saws and stuff like that. Um, our goal was to be selective. Obviously, we wanted to make sure that we weren't disturbing the native habitat on Big McGraw, as well as identifying the yellow iris versus the blue iris correctly. So this was a photo that Zach took during his mapping, where you can see there's a lot of instances where there was a blue iris right next to a yellow iris. And sometimes without it being flowering, it's often difficult to distinguish between these two. So I thought this was a really good photo to just kind of showcase, okay, look at how extensive that native vegetation is. as well as what we were working with the control. Luckily, we had a high water year, so we kind of based our control off of manual removal. We wanted to avoid doing any herbicide treatments, especially in Douglas County. I don't think they can control invasive species using herbicides anyways. We do have the option to do herbicide, but we do want to uh, avoid that as much as possible just because there's a lot of gray area, a lot of permitting and stuff like that. So for this first year, we just did manually digging, and then cutting below the water line and or seed head removal. So this is kind of just showcasing all of those methods that day. So the bottom three photos are my interns and I going around the island. We actually were able to pull a lot of these directly out of the lake just because they were kind of boggy. Um, and that sort of thing. And then we have just right along the same shoreline, probably not even 25 feet away, we had a volunteer cutting under the water as well as digging. So there's just a lot of variability in between the stands along the shoreline. And you can obviously see this photo on the right, the extensive wetlands that we're working with too. So we want to make sure that we're being um, uh, not too disruptive to that shoreline area because we don't want to cause any further erosion than there already is. And then just cutting and what we did for disposing methods is we basically bagged them all up, and I have a landfill at my county highway department where we basically just throw the plants in a hole, let them dry first, and then throw them in the hole and dig them or bury them. So we completely took everything out of the lake and removed it from the location so it doesn't resprout. So like I said, we had 12 volunteers. Oh, I should mention, one reason why we wanted to cut under the water is because a lot of those stems are porous. So we could suffocate it by drowning it basically. And we've seen a lot of success, especially the control sites that I've done in Burnett, where we would cut it underneath the water, suffocate it, and it doesn't come back the next year. I haven't had much experience digging just because a lot of the time when I controlled it, we just had a high water year and we were able to drown them. But Zach, did you want to mention some of the uh, successes with digging? Because I know they have
Sure.
extensive root systems. So I guess how is that process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's worse. Like when you see one that's growing completely out of the water, that's a great opportunity to cut those stems underwater. And if you can cut them all, essentially the metabolic process within the plant continues to run and it starts trying to grow for the surface so it can do its gas exchange. But as it conducts those metabolic processes, it builds up a byproduct called acetaldehyde, which is toxic. And if it can't reach the surface to disperse that metabolic byproduct in a certain amount of time, it's dead. And you've controlled that plant in a really efficient and targeted way. The other option of digging out the rhizomes is more challenging because it's more labor intensive, it's heavier, it is also effective, but typically, in my experience from other systems, um, if you dig the best you possibly can and you do a really thorough job, you're going to see somewhere between 0 and 25% regrowth the following year. So that plant is not going to be totally dead and gone, and it's going to require follow up. Um, the idea is the next year it only takes 25% as much time to dig that plant again, and then perhaps a third year is required. So the drier plants are definitely more challenging, but manual digging is still a method that can achieve success.
Okay. Yeah, so just some control stats from this year. Like I said, we had 12 volunteers. We're hoping to get more next year. Roughly 24 properties were controlled, and those were the sites that we received permission to do this. So you can obviously see in this map that there are some parcels that we still need permission for. Um, the northern part of Douglas, we have permission for all of those sites. It just I didn't have the map layer to add the parcel information for Douglas County before this meeting. So we are looking for more sites to be added. So that is a little caveat with our first year is, we didn't get to those sites. So there could be, seed dispersal and that sort of thing. So we're hoping to get more permission next year, but we'll basically be going out and doing the same thing as last year, mapping, seeing how effective we were, getting more permission, getting more volunteers, and hopefully controlling more stands. We controlled roughly 57 stands around the lake. So because Zach did that high resolution mapping, we can go to each of those points. If the point's not there, we would basically say that, yeah, I think it didn't come back. Or if we're seeing more come up than previous years, we know that we still have a lot of work to do in that standpoint. So the parcels that we controlled are in the green, like green color. And then you still see those blue irises with the yellow irises. The yellow dots are the yellow iris and the blue dots are the native blue iris. So yeah, like I said, next year, we'll do the high resolution mapping to see how effective we were with our control methods. We plan to do that, May and June when the yellow iris is flowering and the blue iris is flowering, just so we can identify those. We'll continue to do the same control methods with the manual digging, cutting under the water line and suffocating and cutting the seed pods off and then removing all of those plant materials away. Um, we do want to recruit some of the landowners on the lake for a demo shoreline buffer practice, just so we can introduce some more native buffer plants to help compete with the species that we controlled. We don't have any of those currently, so if you are a big McGraw landowner and are interested with that practice, the plants would be completely covered by the grant. So we would take care of that. You just need to let us know if you want some plants planted on your shoreline after we control the species.
Yeah, absolutely. So reach out to us if you want to get involved. Now, Emily and I work on aquatic invasive species quite a bit, so we just have to leave you with this one brief message about prevention because Big McGraw is in great shape. When you go out there and you see a plant growing in the water, 99.9% of them are fantastic, beneficial native plants. So we're trying to keep it that way. And you can see from our talk about this project today how much work it is to deal with an aquatic invasive once it gets in the lake. Um, so I just want to briefly remind folks, other aquatic invasive species are still a threat while we're working on yellow iris. They can get into new waterways through landscape plantings of inappropriate plants, through dirty equipment or boats. Um, so please, just think about cleaning, draining, and drying your equipment before it comes to the lake. And I'll plug super briefly that Clean Boats, Clean Waters is an awesome program in Wisconsin where folks inspect boats on the way in. It can be really effective prevention. Emily has her interns doing some of this, including at Big McGraw, but they've got a lot of ground to cover. So, more specifically targeted Clean Boats, Clean Waters workers can be sponsored by a lake association, and they can often be paid for by Wisconsin DNR surface waters grants. So Big McGraw folks, put that in the back of your mind, and Emily and I can provide you with some resources to get the ball rolling on that if it's something that interests folks. Next slide.
Yeah, I
Should
think
be our last.
Yeah, I think that concludes our talk, but we did want to, thank our volunteers and partners from the Wild Rivers Conservancy, the National Park Service, and the Burnett County Lakes and Rivers Association. Without you guys, we would have had a lot of work to do. So hopefully you come back next year. Hopefully you guys had fun, but we just want to thank you for assisting us this year, and we hope to add more potentially landowners on Big McGraw next year. So yeah, we do want to open it up for questions. Because this is tailored to Big McGraw, if there's any landowners that live on the lake that have questions, we do want to hear from you. So feel free to either unmute or um, put something in the chat, and we'd love to answer your questions. But thanks everybody for attending. So anybody got anything?
I'll
This
just
is
keep
Greg.
an
I
eye.
do. But I'll
Great.
wait. Oh, I'm up.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, one thing I noticed when we were out there is the seed pods were mature enough where we could actually identify them, and we did do this, and we did identify some blue flags, so we were careful. Maybe that, I mean, if you don't have flowers, that's really your only other choice because there is pretty hard to tell them apart. But the other question I had was we had some pretty big areas where we were working. I think we zeroed in on the source of the problem with that one property owner that had them planted in their gardens. And did we get any complaints from any of the property owners on making kind of a mess? Because that one property in particular, it was kind of a mess when we were done.
I haven't heard
Good.
any complaints.
All right, great. That's
Yeah,
all I
thanks,
have.
Greg.
Yeah. The only other thing I can say is on Round Lake where I'm at, I found the source of the problem there too, and it happens to be probably the largest historical contributor to the lake. Larry Gamenti was president, and he was involved when we discovered the milfoil and the curly leaf. And he's got a beautiful patch of yellow irises about 10 feet from the shoreline. And he planted them there to keep the geese out of his yard, 20 years ago, but now we got to deal with that problem. So
Yeah. Yeah, it can definitely happen. And, I think that um, everyone involved is well intentioned, including some garden supply stores that inadvertently sell these plants. And it just happens. But, there are programs working with some of the landscapers and the garden supply places to educate and make sure they're not dispersing these plants. And at this point, they're in there and we'll deal with them. But hopefully, we can keep spreading that information, that this is a species to watch out for. I'm seeing a question in the chat. Thank you. Thanks, folks, for all the kind
Yeah.
words. Mike is saying, do you have any more information or studies on the underwater cutting / drowning of the plant and its effectiveness? Yes, off the top of my head, one comes to mind. I believe, forgive me, author of this study if I butcher the last name, but I think it's Tara Soth and her work group out of British Columbia. And I will just have a look and see if I can locate a link to that real quick. But they did some work in the Pacific Northwest where they compared benthic mats to the practice of cutting the stems underwater. And they found that the cutting of stems has nearly 100% efficacy. When I read that, I was excited to put it into practice on the Brule River, but I was skeptical of that 100% efficacy. Um, and when I tried it out, the results I saw were, yes, nearly 100% efficacy if that plant is completely located underwater. If it's got 50 stems and two of them peek out above the water line, then it can do gas exchange and it can rescue the whole plant. So when you have these plants that are straddling the shoreline and they're half dry, half wet, that's where I've seen poor efficacy. But yeah, personally, I've seen the results of that study, kind of confirmed in practice as long as the whole plant is located underwater.
Yeah, I see a question from Jerry. I know Jerry is a landowner on Big McGraw, and he asked, "Do you know when the control day will be this summer? How will you inform us?" So, I plan to send everybody, another uh mailing, um, like a paper mailing invite, just because I don't have everybody's email or phone numbers on the lake. So you just expect something to come through your mailbox early spring, probably around April, March or April, once we kind of finalize what we want to do for our control days. But it's probably going to be around that end of May to early June time frame. But we'll certainly let everybody know that we'll be out there, and we'll be sending those permission slips um out too, which I think we have a question from Colleen about that. My family and I own lake property. How can we be part of the homeowner approval process? Is there a form to fill out? Are you talking about like the demo plantings, or are you talking about um
I think
getting a
maybe
permission to control the yellow iris?
I'm just wondering how we can take advantage of any efforts to remove yellow irises that are on our family property. Either we can help with it. That's why I liked hearing that we will get information as far as the next work days, because some of us might be very interested in coming to help with that, because that will be instructional for us going forward after the work day of what to look for on our own property. But yes, how I don't recall ever seeing anything where you were checking with homeowners. I'm assuming to get permission to come onto property.
Sure. That might be maybe you don't have it specifically on your property. Um, because I only sent permission slips to people that we knew had them. But if you want to be included in the workday, I do plan on sending invitations out to everybody with the information. We do provide training that day. And it might even be beneficial for Zach and I to do like a group training with just the landowners that might be interested next year too, um, to help, you know, alleviate some of the laborsome efforts that we have as staff. And then you could keep up on, cutting the seed pods off, or at least you know how to identify it, and do your own control efforts after the grant period's done, because the grant ends 2026. Um, but we can certainly talk about getting more trainings for the landowners this 2025 year.
I really appreciate that. And I also like hearing about being able to identify the blue iris, the desirable species, so that again, as a family, because there are several siblings that own the lake house, we can inform each other. This is what we want. This is what we don't want. And in the coming years, we can keep doing that. And I just gave you my email address. I was the one that asked when the recording would be available. So you've got my email address in there. So if you could email whatever paperwork you have, um, I don't know how you're planning to send it out, if you're sending it via snail mail or via email.
Yeah, the first round, I did just send it as a letter in the mail, just because I
Okay.
didn't have everybody's contact information. But once I received our permission slips back from the landowners that gave us permission, I did get phone numbers and emails. But I will make sure to send you our correspondence through the email, just so the mailman doesn't potentially lose the letter or something like that.
We do not have a mailbox up and
Okay.
running in the
Yeah,
time in the time that we're there. So
sure.
we get things through the county. Those things come through the mail, like this mailing um, came to our attention about today's meeting. So yeah, if you could email me, that would be wonderful. I really appreciate all that you're doing here. Thank you so much.
Yep.
awesome. Yeah, thank you, Colleen. We will get that out by email, and that kind of involvement from our local community is what makes these projects work over the long term. So that's so fantastic to hear.
Yeah, and
Um,
Emily and Zach, this is Jerry. Another suggestion for you is you're right, we don't have a formal lake association, but we have a Big McGraw Lake Community Facebook page that is pretty active. You might want to consider if there's information you want the lake owners and people from the area to know about, you might consider using that.
Yeah, I know Burnett County is a little bit slow on the times with our social media sites, but maybe Zach, you just got your social media site up and running. Maybe we could either have you join their group, or we could send Jerry some information to submit onto their Facebook page.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that.
Okay.
awesome. Yeah, thank you, Jerry. That sounds great. Yeah, I think going forward, one of the things we're definitely looking to do is fill in the puzzle pieces on that map, so
Mhm.
landowners talk to your neighbors and we'll make this a community effort and hopefully we can pull together permissions for the entire lake shoreline.
Sorry, one more question. If you had signed an approval sheet last year, will you have to sign a new one, or is that good for multiple years?
It should be good. I don't think you would need to re-sign it.
I see a question coming in from Laura. Is this program only available on McGraw? Um, yes, this grant and this project is only on Big McGraw Lake. Um, but is there a specific lake? If there's a specific lake that you're concerned about or you're noticing yellow flag irises, definitely use our contact info freely. Shoot us a photograph, and we're always interested in documenting those things and assessing whether other water bodies need a similar project in the future. Well, thank you, everyone. This was wonderful. Are there any last questions that folks would like to ask?
I guess as a resident on the lake, I just want to thank you guys for the work you're doing on this and the effort you're taking to protect our lake.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're here for.
Totally. Thank you, Jerry. Okay, well, and thank you everyone else for your attention. We so appreciate it. When that burning question comes to your mind, feel welcome to email us, be in touch. If you're a landowner, reach out to Emily or myself with questions, with permission forms, and we will use the physical mailings, the emails, and the Facebook page to keep everyone updated about progress and the continuing project next summer.
All right. Thanks, guys. Happy holidays.